So this huge Pokemon leak happened, and fans have been calling it the Teraleak, and it's basically like this huge swarm of unofficial information on internal documents that were not supposed to be in our hands today. And it's been very talked about online for various reasons, but today's video is neither about sensationalizing the stuff that has been coming out, nor is it a complete rundown of every single piece of news that came out from this. I just think there's some interesting conversations to be had about this whole deal, and a lot of interesting thoughts that I've had looking at the stuff, and I wanted to share it all with you guys. But before anything else, I need to preface that this whole situation isn't really a good thing. It's nice to get information on games that we like and media that we are interested in, you know, background, development details. That's all really cool to know as fans. But these weren't the only things that came out of this leak. Developers' personal information is now out there in a way that really isn't good for anyone involved. Besides, getting information on games that aren't even announced yet fully aren't really good things either. While it's nice to know, you know that the game was not supposed to be announced like this. We're seeing a product that by an artist's hand is not ready to be shown yet, and that's, you know, kind of sad as a developer. I don't think that should be the standard. I don't think we should celebrate that. But the information is out there, and now that it is out there, everyone knows it, everyone's been talking about it, and I think it's just a ways to not talk about it either. So here's my best attempt to be respectful about it while also discussing the things I thought were most interesting about the whole deal. First off, we gotta address the massive elephant in the room. I'll try to keep it quick because honestly I'm kind of tired of this subject already, but I feel like I have to mention it if we're talking about the leaks. Those weird Pokemon myth folktale stories that came out from those internal writing documents, they seem to be made for Generation 4, and they detail some pretty, let's just say, weird, gruesome stuff that you would not expect from Pokemon at all. Some very graphic imagery, and some of it even, you know, not really adequate to be discussed on YouTube, to be honest, at least not safely. So I'm gonna spare you the details, but if you're a Pokemon fan that's been hanging around online, you're probably aware of those details. And like, even right now, it's sort of a meme, and people have been talking about it and memeing about it and whatnot. And of course, it's absurd enough where, of course, people are gonna joke about it. It is funny, let's be real. It is so uncharacteristic of the franchise that gotta get a laugh out of it, at least one or two, you know? It's just kind of frustrating because now people are taking it as canon, or worse yet, taking it for what simply wasn't meant to be, which was clearly some sort of world-building writing exercise so they could get the hang of doing these Pokemon myths for Generation 4, because Generation 4 was built around this sort of mythology they were starting to construct for the Pokemon world. The whole game is about gods and time and space, and Girardino, which is basically a devil. You know, this is just the writers flexing their creative muscles, and that's just part of the creative process. It's not some unhinged, horny developer out there simply trying to, you know, make a story about Typhlosion committing pedophilia because they like it. It's literally part of the process. It's just a story. These were unreleased for a reason. They're development docs, and they were clearly taken out of context. From what we could gather, these stories are supposed to be folklore for the Pokemon world, and this kind of experiment is only healthy for creating a deeper, more developed world for your game or your story in general. It's good for sharpening writing skills as well. This was a point of the franchise where the creators were really trying to understand what the Pokemon world even is. You know, this was Gen 4. Most of the franchise is already after this by now, and back then they still didn't have that many legendaries to write stories on, or, you know, that much of a mythology. Generation 4 was kind of specifically written around that idea to create that. And of course you're gonna experiment, see what works and what doesn't. These stories, they're clearly based on real world, especially Eastern folklore stories. You can look it up, it's out there. One of the stories is even called The Original Sin as of the Current Pokemon World. Emphasis on current Pokemon world. This was how they, as the writers, were trying to understand what the Pokemon world was as of writing, as of creating that portion of the story, which was like fucking over, what, 15 years ago by now? It is in concept admittedly really funny though. Just advise y'all to use the joke in moderation. Pokemon fans have a reputation for only having 4 jokes and for not being able to read, and if this keeps being perpetuated as some sort of truth as far as the story itself goes, it's only gonna be worse for us in the long run. Take a joke, take a fact, move on, it's past. You're allowed to like Typhlosion, okay? It's a good Pokemon, it's a very cool Pokemon, I like Typhlosion. But aside from all that, the whole reason I actually wanted to make this video, and my biggest takeaway from all of this information that has been coming out, is actually how all the documents that we've been getting and all the information that has been coming out of them really goes to show how human the developers of these games really are. And that's a thing I haven't seen anyone else talking about. Whenever I watch the Pokemon anime, for example, there's always this thing in the back of my mind that has to keep screaming in my head, oh, this is a kid's show, this is a kid's show. And like, they're not gonna address any darker stuff, they're not gonna deal with violence or sex and whatnot. And thank goodness they're not gonna do that. But it's easy to forget that the people writing these stories know what these things are. They're just not allowed to work with it. Sometimes when I'm consuming a Pokemon thing or anything that's for kids, there's a part of me that kind of stands high and mighty thinking, oh, I'm smarter than the story here. But you know, this was written by real humans. Real adults who know the fucked up parts of this world, and they're just trying to translate it in a more digestible way for more, like, let's just say diverse audiences. And at least I always tend to forget that that's the case, that there are people behind this. This extends to the games and everything else. It's all made by a team of artists creating a project. All the talk about Pokemon has been incredibly cynical lately online for admittedly kind of decent reasons. You know, this isn't gonna be a whole video on the state of Pokemon. I've already made a video on that, you can check it out. As far as I go, I'm actually really happy with a lot of the stuff that has been coming out of Pokemon recently, but I also don't think the games should be as rushed as they have been lately. The state that Scarlet and Violet came out is not really acceptable, despite the fact that I actually really enjoyed the game. So it's fair that the conversation around Pokemon has been about how this massive franchise created by this conglomerate is the most highest grossing thing ever created. But in the midst of that, I forget that, yeah, this is made by a fairly small team who generally wants to create a product that people will enjoy. And they're willing to experiment and try weird things, and things are cut and things are changed around to accommodate that, you know? Pokemon as a whole has been in a series of, let's just say, awkward situations lately that only fuel this sort of discourse. And I'm not trying to bring out the small indie studio card here, but yeah, Game Freak, like it or not, is kind of understaffed and underprepared in a lot of ways. And while this is definitely something that has to be addressed and improved, especially on the side of the corporate side of Pokemon Company, you know, the people actually making the big decisions of when a game has to come out and stuff, you can't really blame the creatives behind this who are clearly just trying to make something cool. The things that have been coming out of the leaks have really opened my eyes about that. They never made a game as big as Sword and Shield until they had to make Sword and Shield. And time again, even then the series sort of differentiates itself from other big franchise cash cows by trying to do something cool and something different, even if a lot of the times this doesn't leave the planning stages, as we can see with the leaks. That's why, again, I still love Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. But even then, games that I feel did not try enough, or at least it felt like it looking at the final product, show a lot of potential. You can check out Skyhopper's video on Pokemon X and Y if you wanna see a more in-depth discussion on why that game specifically seems like it was trying to say and do a lot more with its story than it actually did. But yeah, all this weird experimental stuff that we have been seeing paints a picture of a team that is always experimenting creatively, even if they're not able to. Even dumb stuff that people have been making jokes about, such as Skyla's character profile describing her as a sexy pilot, Latina, is kind of a vibe. At least it says that no, they're not creating sort of like cardboard cutout whatever characters to just populate the game. No, they're thinking about characters will emit certain vibes or certain ideas. They're basing off characters on different characters from different media, such as anime and whatnot. These same character profiles that were out there for Generation 5 show how for each of them they had references and ideas, and specific points the writers have that they sent to the artists so they could create the designs around it. There's even this screenshot of Ken Sugimori doing some art for the games while listening to goddamn tokusatsu music. You know, these games aren't made by robots. There are people involved. Even if when it's not that obvious, when we get the games, they are products. They are very easy to cynically dissect, for better or worse. And since Pokemon has been kind of messy and kind of all over the place lately, it's even easier to dissect them specifically. But this means the discussion gets very muddied, thanks also to the size of the franchise. And while I'm not defending the company's worst practices, I think it's an interesting angle people tend to forget. I kind of forgot, and was only looking at these documents that I kind of remembered the whole aspect of game development as a whole. Kind of makes me wish that some of these documents and some of this information was released officially. While I know some of this just wouldn't come out under normal means, it would be nice to know that X character was inspired by Y character from Z anime, or to see some of the scrap Pokemon designs. If anything, seeing this just helped the developer's case for me. It made me more intrigued by the franchise and the process behind creating each of the games and each of the creatures and every single piece of media around Pokemon. And I know there's some secrecy in that. The developers don't want these designs to go out there and become popular, and suddenly we have a Pokemon that's not really a Pokemon because not actually in the games. I would argue it does more good than harm. One of the most interesting pieces of information that came out of all of this was this meeting document where they were discussing the idea of Ash Ketchum leaving the Pokemon anime when that was about to actually happen. And it's so interesting looking at this and seeing the members of the team clarifying themselves to each other, disagreeing on certain aspects of how it should be done, if it should be done at all, discussing on things, and even pointing out discussion points that I thought that only we fans knew about. At one point they mentioned resetting Ash Ketchum's character, which was a thing fans were complaining about ever since, what, Generation 5 at the very least? And for the longest time, that was just a fan concept to me. That was a thing that we fans identified in the product, and we started criticizing it, assuming the creators didn't even really notice what they were doing, or at the very least didn't care enough to not do it. But here it is, proof in concrete digital form that they were aware of these things and maybe even aware of the criticism. They're listening, they're creating these things. When talking about media, sometimes we assume the creators simply don't get it, but of course they do. They literally created the thing. In the meeting, they were even discussing how to do this process. They were afraid of freaking death threats by fans. Like, that's so surprisingly humanizing. I never thought that would be the case, but of course that would. Honestly, how can you look at all of this, especially if you're an artist or worked on group projects before, and not at the very least empathize with these people? That discussion specifically reads a lot like just a fan discussion in a forum with the added sauce of the risk of death threats involved. Then again, this kind of stuff kind of happens on forums sometimes anyway, but I digress. But hey, if you don't empathize with that, at least you can empathize with your boy over here and give me a like and subscribe, am I right? Because yeah, that's about all I wanted to talk about today. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you have anything to add to the conversation, please do so respectfully in the comments below. With that said, thanks so much for watching and see y'all next time!